10-game event. It was a Swiss system, 10 rounds. We only have a record of 6 of Bobby's games. Note that one of his losses was against the great Victor Pupos. Also note the misspelling of the names, just like not doing a good job in the editing department, apparently, back in those days. But Fischer, with only 2 wins, 2 losses, and 6 draws. His rating 1830 going into the event, certainly lower coming out. Thomason was from Fort Worth, Texas, with a rating of 1600. For those who don't know, when we talk about a junior championship, we're talking about under 21 years of age. All right, let's have a look at this game between Thomason and Bobby Fischer. Thomason beginning with D4. Well, Fischer with knight F6, the Indian game, C4, and G6 is a King's Indian defense. Knight C3, Bishop G7 is a normal variation. E4 and D6, Knight F3, kingside castles. And Thomason leaves the book here and plays Bishop D3. The book move is Bishop E2. It's the orthodox variation. Let me show you the book line. After Bishop E2, E5, castles, Knight C6. Knight C6 sets the tabia for the Aronin-Taimanov defense. D5, Knight E7, Knight E1 is the classical system. Knight D7, Bishop E3 is the neoclassical line. F5 and F3 is the traditional line, then F4, Bishop F2, G5, A4, Knight G6, and A5. All right, the most common line, by the way, this is the end of the ECO, but the most common move from here is H5, Knight B5, and Knight F6. Let's go back. In this game, Bishop D3 by Thomason. Now Bishop G4 pins the knight, castles. Knight C6, Bishop E3 defends the pawn. Knight D7, Bishop E2 breaks the pin. Bishop takes the knight, Bishop takes the bishop, E5 and D5. The most common move is Knight D4, which is what black should play here. Bobby with Knight E7, and I gave it a question mark. Bishop E2 here, F5, and F4 is not the right way. The better move is F3, and it is slightly more popular than F4. It's surprising how many amateurs play F4, but F4 in this game. Now here the most common move is E takes F4, but I actually prefer F takes E4. Bobby played H6 here. I'm giving it an inaccuracy. The move I'm liking is pawn takes E4, and after G4, pawn takes F4. Rook will take here, and here you can play bishop takes knight and bust up these pawns. Then rook takes rook, bishop takes rook, and queen F8. And black is looking okay here. Anyway, bishop to queen 3 or D3, depending on what you prefer. And Bobby should play pawn takes bishop pawn. That would keep the balance, but that's not what he played. He played king to rook 2. You prefer algebraic. King H7. Now look at the eval bar creeping over toward white's favor. E takes F4 is the better choice. I said keeps the balance, but the eval bar says this favors black. After rook takes pawn, you can play G5 here and hit that rook. And then F4 comes next. All right, queen E2 here by Thomason. And now pawn takes E4. 2 ways to capture back. To me, bishop takes E4 seems more appropriate. Thomason went knight takes E4. I like bishop takes E4 because you have some pressure here on the king. You have potential ideas of maybe striking at it with this pawn and so forth. Of course, if black plays knight F5, you can just trade that off. And then you can play G4. And the eval bar is favoring white in this line. Thomason with knight takes the pawn. And now knight F5 can be played without fear of being traded off. And knight F5 is played by Bobby Fischer. The bishop went to D2, and now pawn takes pawn. This looks nice. Bishop takes pawn, knight E5. Thomason, wanting to hang on to the bishop pair, played bishop c2. Really, the more principled move is king h1 in a line like this. Get off this diagonal as quickly as possible. But that's not the main problem with bishop to c2. I give it a double question mark. The real problem with bishop to c2 is that it does nothing to stop knight d4, which I give an exclam. Of course, that hits the queen. Queen d1 is pretty much forced here, and this should actually get a double question mark as well. I reverse marked these. I annotated these backwards. The bishop should have gotten a single question mark. The queen should have gotten the double question mark. And the eval bar bears that out. So queen d1 has to be played here to keep this fight alive. And yeah, you're losing this pawn either way, but at least this pawn's not being captured with tempo. Here, boom, and all of a sudden black is clearly winning. And again, the only way to keep fighting is the unnatural queen d1. I say unnatural because, taking this pawn with another hit and making you go right back. Well, I say keep fighting. Look at the eval bar. Once the eval bar is up at the top like that, there is no more fight. But queen f2, and it's even more quickerer because Bobby snatching up this bishop. And as you can see, there's a relationship between the square upon which the king stands because he failed to play king h1 and the square upon which the rook now stands and the queen now stands. We have this little, what I call a pinwheel relationship. And as you can see, knight e2 check. And Thomason resigned right there, rightfully so.